Well, due to the viral outbreak that I'm sure, I'm pretty sure everyone's heard about, I haven't gotten any work. And so because, society is collapsing and we will pretty much never be able to live the way we did before, and our whole society is going to change because of this, I figured I'd talk about cameras because I'm not getting any new tech products in anytime soon because I'd rather not be spending my money on that. So I figured I'll take the time to make probably a multi-part series, just talking about different things about cameras, the technicalities and things like that, at least what I know, and what I've learned over my tenure of doing professional work. So yeah, I think to start, the first thing we should talk about is the different types of cameras that you can get, namely the differences between a mirrorless camera and a DSLR camera. So I figured for the sake of physical comparisons, since all I have to work with are Nikon cameras, I'll just compare the Nikon Z6, what I'm using right now, and another camera that is within the same price bracket and has a lot of similar specs in terms of megapixels and sensor sizes, and compare those two physical sizes and what they're capable of. So the first thing we should establish is what the difference is between mirrorless cameras and DSLR cameras. And the main difference between them is just in terms of the physical aspect of mirrorless cameras being smaller and lighter. However, they do tend to be more expensive. This is because DSLR cameras use a lot less digital components. They rely on mirrors inside the body, so then you can see through the optical viewfinder straight through the lens. And through this, once you press the shutter button, the mirrors move out of the way and the light that is being sent through the lens gets to the sensor and imprinted on film or is digitized onto the SD card. So while of course this type of camera is effective and is by no means outdated, it is definitely using a lot older technology, whereas mirrorless cameras started to become viable for professional photographers in the mid-2010s as they started to reduce in price. If there's no mirrors inside a mirrorless camera, obviously, how do you see through it? Well, because of advancements in modern technology, how it works is that there is an electronic display inside the eyepiece as well as being able to use the back LCD. And this has one of my favorite benefits being that you can immediately see the exposure. You get what you see in the electronic viewfinder is immediately what you get on the camera, which helps just quickly get set proper exposure. And not only that, but because there are less moving parts inside of a mirrorless camera, it should theoretically last a lot longer. Because if anybody who's been around technology should know, you do not want any moving pieces inside something that you want to last for a long time. So if mirrorless cameras are smaller, lighter, and have more up-to-date features, then what's the drawback? Well, they do tend to be more expensive, and also not only that, the battery runs out a lot faster because of the electronic viewfinder, and they don't have as big of a selection of lenses. One example would be the Nikon F-mount, which this body can use any lens that dates back from the 50s, whereas the Nikon Z6 I'm shooting with right now only has about 6 lenses. You can get an adapter, but it's just a lot easier to find compatible lenses if you just don't need the adapter. There's been many occasions when I needed this body, but I wanted to bring my 70-200 and I forgot the adapter, so it was completely unusable and I hauled around this massive lens for no reason. But the important thing to know about which camera to get is what you plan on doing with it. If you plan on just doing some recreational photo, video work, then I'd strongly just recommend sticking with the DSLR. Maybe not one like this one. I'd recommend something like this because it's a little cheaper, because I don't think there's anything worse than getting into something, spending a lot of money, and then realizing, oh yeah, no, I'm not that interested. And then you just gotta sell it, which is just a waste. Not to mention that you have a wider selection of lenses with DSLR cameras over mirrorless cameras, and they are a lot cheaper, especially vintage lenses, which work just fine. Also, if you do plan on doing vlogs, I would recommend getting one with a flippy screen, so you can see what the hell is going on. A lot of mirrorless cameras don't offer that. They have tilting screens, but they don't have, the only ones that I know of that have articulating screens are Panasonic cameras and Canon cameras. Although I'm sure there are other ones, but those are the main ones that I can think of right now. If, however, you want to dip your toes in a little professional work, it starts to get a little tricky to say, especially depending on what your budget is. If you are planning to just focus on photography, I would still recommend a DSLR, maybe one that's a little higher grade, because in terms of just photography, there's not much that a DSLR can't do that a mirrorless can. Apart from mirrorless cameras having a completely silent shutter, which is useful for wildlife photography. But outside of that, I'd say just get a professional DSLR camera like this, because then you don't have to spend a lot on lenses. So one thing I'd recommend to people getting into this line of work, which is, and it's just my personal opinion, but I think that if you do want to work photo or video, I'd recommend learning how to do both. That way, if you are working with individuals, local businesses, things like that, they'd much rather work with one person instead of having to reach out to 2 different people to get these things done. It just makes it a lot easier for them and yourself, and it also helps build a rapport with your clients. Also, I forgot to mention that that's why I would recommend people in doing the same thing as me to get a mirrorless camera, because while DSLRs can take decent video, I find that mirrorless cameras do offer more features. They're a little more versatile. You can do a lot more with them. I found personally, if you work with Nikon, the mirrorless cameras offer so many more features in terms of video capabilities than any of their DSLRs, because until recently, Nikon has been really lacking in terms of the video department. It wasn't until they released the Z6 where it actually became started to compete with Sony and Canon in terms of video quality. So that's just what I found. At the end of the day, what it depends on is your budget and what you're planning on doing with it. And unfortunately, I can't give a definitive answer as to what camera you should get, especially when there are brands that I don't even know about or have rarely used. I might cover brands in another discussion. However, that is a very nuanced and biased discussion to be having. So that pretty much covers everything that I know about these different types of cameras and what they have to offer. I'm by no means a long-time professional. Anyways, in later videos I will be talking about exposure and bitrate and resolution, frame rates and shutter speeds and all that stuff later. But I hope that during this quarantine, although hopefully things will start winding down soon, I hope that people who have cameras and don't use them pick them up, try new things. So yeah, if you enjoyed this kind of video, let me know. You can like the video or comment, ask a question. I would definitely answer it. But until then, I'll see you guys next time. I like my Star Wars poster.